There's quite a bit of money in here, as you can see, 558 billion in deposits, and that number is an old number. It's definitely higher than that. Uh, Lots and lots of plan participants. Um, TSP is considered part of the FERS three-legged stool, as I mentioned earlier. Uh, and if you're FERS, you do get a match. If you're CSRS, while you can contribute to TSP, it is not, you do not get a match on it. So for this is an old slide, so this is 2023 deferral, 2024 deferral. You can do 23,000 in as your salary deferral, and your catch-up provision is 7,500. If you're 50 or older, that's when that kicks in. You can contribute that additional money. So again, that's $30,500 if you add it together. And you actually that amount goes up generally every year. Um, there are some provisions in the Tax Act laws that were passed during COVID that actually will boost this up a decent amount for 2025. So, keep your eyes out if you're trying to max out how to do this, how much you can put in. But again, this is something you can make the elections on the TSP site or through HR into how much you want to defer. And if you tell HR you just want to max it out, they can kind of calculate that out for you as to what needs to go in from each pay period. It is vitally important, though, that you um, contribute because it is, again, part of your three-legged stool. You also want to make sure that you're not leaving money on the table. So you want to get your full 5% going in to get the max. And you want to spread it out throughout the year because you have to have a contribution going in each pay period for the match to go in each pay period. So if you try to do it all put everything you can in at the beginning of the year because of compounding of interest, you'll get a match during those periods. But then later in the year, when you're not contributing, you won't get a match. So it is very important that you essentially dollar cost average your contributions over the course of the year. Inside the TSP, you have two options. You have a pre-tax side or traditional TSP side, and then you also have a Roth TSP side. So what you'll see here is that contributions to the regular TSP side, they do subtract your tax from your taxable income amount for the year. So you are essentially deferring taxes on that money to a future, date to be named in retirement, basically. So the way the match works is the employees, well, the federal government's going to give you a 1% automatic match. You are vested in that after a 3-year period of time. Then on your matching side, so for the first 3% you elect to put in, they're going to match that dollar for dollar. Then 50 cents on the dollar for the next two. So if you do the math, that's 3% at 100%. So that's three. Then 50% of the next two, or 50 cents on the dollar for the next 2%. So that's 1% more if you did that. So you're putting in five, you add it up, it's three, plus the one is four, plus the automatic one above is five. So essentially, just remember that 5% is kind of that amount you want to put in to sort of maximize the match component. You can certainly contribute more than that, but the match won't go up higher than that. Um, what constitutes your salary? And this is going to be both for your FERS pension calculation as well as to what they are using to figure out how much to defer into your pension. It's your base pay plus locality pay. Now, some of you, when you look on your pay stub, are going to see it as one number. Some agencies do break it out to a base plus locality. Generally, you can see this up towards the top of your pay stub. Postal employees are a little bit different where it's located. It's usually down on the kind of the side for you, but important number to know in your FERS calculation, your pension calculation, they do not include overtime pay, bonuses, or any of that type of stuff. It's simply your base plus locality that goes into the math on that. The default enrollment for new hires in TSP is now 5%. That's where they start you at. You can opt to do less. That is kind of that starting point for you. Um, in terms of your investments, it used to be that they auto enrolled people in the G fund. Now, G, the easiest way to think about that is it's G is for government, G is for guarantee. So you're not going to lose any money in that. You're not going to make much money. It's basically U.S. Treasuries that you're invested in. So it does give you nice principal protection, but think of it as like an enhanced savings account from a rate of growth standpoint. There are other options that you get to pick from. And so the default option is no longer the G fund because what they did is they found out they did an audit of the plan a number of years back and they found out that a lot of employees had the bulk, if not all of their money in G fund and really weren't getting the power of compounding growth or compounding interest on that money. And so they switched up what the default option is. It's no longer the G fund. It's now what's called an L fund or an L share. Another way to they'll be referred to as a target date fund. I'll touch on those here in just a minute, but so just a page that tells you kind of how to contact TSP. Again, the easiest way and the way they prefer is tsp.gov, the website itself. TSP investment options. So there are essentially five. You have the G fund, which I mentioned a minute ago. You have the S fund, the C fund, the I, and the F fund. All of those funds are managed by a company called BlackRock. They manage about 90% of the TSP assets. There is another company called State Street that manages about 10%. They were brought in a few years back to try to help the burden, if you will, on BlackRock. But because so much of it runs through uh, one entity, basically in BlackRock, and there's so few options, they're able to keep the cost down on the plan or your what's called your expense ratios. They are very, very low in TSP. And so let me go through what those funds mean. So the C fund is the only one that kind of doesn't make sense for why they call it the C fund. That is the S&P 500. So that's generally when you hear somebody refer to the market, that's what they're talking about. That is the C fund. It is essentially that index minus a teeny percent that I mentioned as that cost for managing it. The S fund is small cap and mid cap companies. So essentially it's like the Dow Jones companies. It's the companies that aren't part of the C fund, essentially, that are make up the rest of the U.S. Economy. The I fund is international funds. So this is mainly your larger developed international countries investments. And then the F is for bonds or fixed income. It's going to be corporate bonds for the most part. So they're trying to get you a little bit better return. There is a risk of loss in all four of those. So remember, I said the G fund is principal protection. The S, C, I, and F all do have the ability technically to lose money. So it's important that you keep that in mind. Now, the L shares, I mentioned those earlier. It's the new default investment choice. They're followed by a year. So it might be like L 2025, L 2030. The year corresponds with the closest year in which they anticipate your retirement age to be. So it's usually measured by your full Social Security age, and they're in 5 year increments. And so it's the closest 5 year increment to that age. Now, as you get older, they automatically, so it's diversified. The L shares consists of S, F, I, F, and G. It's pre allocated or mixed based on BlackRock's recommendations. And then as you get older, so the younger you are, the more aggressive that fund is. And I say younger, it does technically it's not tied to your age, it's tied to the date. So if you pick like a L2050 or L2060 fund, it's going to be very aggressive. Very little of the G fund in those. If you have an L2025 fund, for example, it is going to be the opposite. It's going to be far more conservative. A lot of the G fund in there, and the other funds or other options are picked mainly to try to keep you above inflation. When we get to the year of the fund, so next year when we turn into 2025, the L 2025 fund will automatically become the L income fund. So as the year for that fund approaches, it will then change into L income, and from L income on, any year after that, once it's in L income, it's about 71% of it is in the G fund, with the other 29% spread amongst the other four fund choices. Again, just trying to keep you up with inflation. What makes up the funds for you already? And this is kind of that mix as I was telling you about. So you can see here the L2050 has 11% in the G, but it's got 40% in C, 13 in S, 29 in I, and 7 in the F. But if you come down here to the L income, it's actually 74% in the G and much lower in the others. So they're definitely flip-flopped on each other. TSP also now offers what's called a mutual fund window. And so this is new since you'll see June of 2022. Essentially, what happened was a lot of people were complaining that there weren't many investment choices, and they felt like the TSP was forcing people to look to IRAs to invest so they could get more investment choices. And so what TSP decided to do is they said, okay, we'll give and we'll create this mutual fund window. And so this is a period that they open up a couple of times, maybe a year, in which you can pick funds that are not part of those core five to invest in. However, the TSP, um, they don't really like the idea of you doing this, so they made it very expensive to do it. So if you choose to do it, there is a just for opting into the window, there's a $150 annual administration fee, and then $28.75 per transaction fee. And then those funds always carry a higher expense ratio as well. So you're going to be really, the idea of picking these outside funds would be to try to get a better return rate, but you're going to end up losing actually because of all the fees that are built up in it. And very few people opt into this. I've only seen one in my entire time of working with federal employees, one person that actually picked this. So keep that in mind. Um, Again, if it's something that you are interested in, I highly encourage you talking to, again, a financial advisor about that decision, is there may be some other options for you. This is a little bit more about that TSP window. You can transfer money again. It's money that's already in the TSP that you're opting into this window. You have to do at least $10,000 when you do it. It cannot exceed 25% of your account balance. So you can see that you have to have $40,000 in the account to be able to do the 10 because of these two kind of requirements. Now, you can change funds between the five core TSP funds uh, pretty regularly. I mean, it's twice a month um, that you can go in and change from most of the funds. It's an unlimited time that you can do into the G fund. So, idea here is that they don't want you day trading in here, but if you get concerned about the market conditions, you do have the ability to go into the G fund to kind of save your balance, right? So something to kind of keep in mind there. It does take about 2 days for your trades to happen. So for those changes to happen, that's important because if you're trying to again time the stock market, it's not going to work. So if you wake up in the morning, you see the stock market's having a bad day, and you want to try to get out, it's too late. It'll take 2 days before those funds actually sell and transfer over into the new mutual fund. This is the basically the uh, kind of averages of different mixes that you can see between 1926 and 2009. So it's just sort of showing you if you were all in stocks and no bonds, the average rate of return was 9.9. If you were no stocks and all bonds, the average rate of return was 5.5%. And that might seem a little high given interest rates these days, but you got to keep in mind in the 80s, interest rates were double digits on savings accounts. So um, that's kind of why there's a little bit of a skewed number in here because of how the length of time that you're looking at. I mentioned it earlier that TSP fees are very, very, very low. The fee is 38 cents per $1,000 invested in any of the funds except the G fund. So the G fund doesn't have any expenses. The other four options do. And again, they're so low because TSP is so large. It is substantially lower than what you'll see in any mutual fund, ETF, or even 401ks or other retirement plans. Uh, because it's low cost, low expense, TSP is a very good what I call accumulation vehicle. So if you're in your working years, your years that you're trying to save money and grow that nest egg as big as possible, TSP is a great vehicle to do that. You can do loans on TSP. I don't really recommend it, but you certainly can. Um, you you can't haven't taken one in the last 60 days, so you can't just do it, over and over again. Um, you can't default on them and you get another loan. There are a couple of different types of TSP loans. So there's one for buying a house that gives you a longer payback period, and then you have a general use or like a health use, emergency use TSP loan option. Those carry shorter payback periods, but the payback, the way it works is you're essentially borrowing money from yourself, and so when you pay it back, they just withhold it out of your paycheck, similar to like a TSP contribution would work. You can make a loan payment and a new TSP contribution, though, on the same check. So taking a loan doesn't prevent you from contributing. It just prevents that money that you've now borrowed out from growing in the market. It's just kind of talking about those general purpose loans or loans to purchase a house. If you are married, you are going to need spousal consent to do that TSP loan. Um, the loan amount limits kind of depends on the type of loan, but you can see that you can borrow the lesser of half of your account balance or $50,000. So you can definitely do that. Um, but again, you have to keep in mind when you're borrowing money from TSP, you are potentially impacting your retirement balance, or the balance you'll have in there at retirement, by either not having paid off the TSP loan at retirement, or you missed out on at least that time period where you had the loan from that money kind of growing with the market. Hardship withdrawals, there are a few here. If you do take a hardship withdrawal from TSP, you can't contribute to TSP for 6 months. Um, if you take it out, they still are going to withhold 20% in taxes. But when you fill out your tax forms, you have to indicate that the withdrawal was for a hardship. That'll prevent you from getting any sort of early withdrawal penalty for it. So age-based withdrawals. This one's a little bit unique in some areas. So we're going to start with if you're still working. So if you're still working, this is an in-service age-based withdrawal. You have to be 59 and a half or over to take advantage of this without getting an early or young age penalty, basically from the IRS. And it can be done on the TSP.gov site. It's very user friendly when it comes to that. You can do up to 4 of these per year. That is much better than it used to be. They used to allow you to do one in your career and then one when you retire, basically. But now uh, you you can do up to 4 a year. There's no ban on contributing because, again, this isn't a hardship withdrawal. This is an age-based withdrawal. Age-based withdrawals can also be rollovers. So a lot of times people will roll TSP assets into an IRA, and in order to get more investment choices or to really build out their retirement strategy. Um, but that's not a taxable event when you do that. So taxes only come into play if you're physically receiving the money in your checking or savings account where you are taking possession of the money, right? Um, TSP, I mentioned it earlier, there's two sides. There's the traditional side or pre-tax side. There's also a TSP Roth. TSP Roth is a very, very powerful vehicle. So the way the Roth works is you are contributing, you're paying the taxes on the earnings, and then the money's going in the Roth. And as long as you keep the Roth in play for 5 years, and you're over 59 and a half when you go to take the money out, uh, none of the distributions from the Roth side are going to have any taxes associated with them, any additional taxes, right? Because you paid the tax on the contributions going in, right? Um, Very, very powerful because Roth IRAs in general, uh, they carry what they call earnings limitations. And there's also caps, much, much lower caps on how much you can contribute per year. So if you remember earlier, we talked about being able to put in over $30,000 if you're age 50 or over, or if you're under 50, $23,000 a year. That can all go into the Roth 401, Roth TSP side. So regular Roth IRAs, though, you're generally limited to around $8,000 this year. And then again, that does adjust up a little bit depending on the year, upwards, right? So it mentions here that qualifying Roth IRAs can also receive rollovers and transfers. Same kind of, rule with that age-based distribution. So when you retire or separate service, you have three different kind of retirement options here. So uh, the first one is here is a lump sum cash out. So a couple of ways that you do this. Again, if you take a lump sum cash out and you move it to another IRA or like a rollover, IRA transfer, or another retirement plan like a 401k at a new employer, right? Those are what's called qualified transfers. There's no taxes or penalties or anything for doing that because you're no longer employed the federal government and you're moving it over to either an IRA or a new employer plan. Uh, However, if you say, no, what, I don't want to do that. I want to take the lump sum and I want it to go to my checking account because I'm going to, go to Vegas for a very great weekend or maybe pay down my mortgage or something. Well, again, depending on how old you are, there may be an age-based penalty, but there's definitely going to be taxes. And so they're going to withhold 20% in taxes from that to cover your federal tax portion. You'll also probably end up paying state taxes depending on which state you live in, though. So definitely important that you keep that in mind. I do not recommend lump sum distributions unless you're doing the IRA rollover or IRA transfer option. And mainly the reason is, again, it's part of your retirement plan. And if you're taking it a lump sum to go to Vegas or something like that, yeah, you'll have a lot of fun, but you're going to pay an insane amount of money in taxes on that distribution. Much better ways to kind of get to that same goal that you might have there. Second way you got here is a fixed dollar amount or substantially equal monthly payments. It is important to keep in mind this is you taking money from TSP monthly, quarterly, or annually. You can pick a dollar amount that you want them to do. You can change it at any time. So it is flexible on that for distributions. But you want to do that as kind of part of your overall retirement strategy. Uh, the third option here is um, what's called the TSP annuity. This one's the only one I will tell you is a horrible option for people, mainly because again, this is MetLife. It's not TSP. And what happens is when you choose the TSP annuity, you are telling TSP to basically give your money to MetLife in exchange for a promise of a payment for the rest of your life, or maybe you and your spouse. Uh, and so it requires what's called, it's not that it's an annuity that's bad, it requires what's called annuitization. And again, that act is you physically giving your money, not depositing, but giving the money to MetLife in exchange for those payments. It is now MetLife's asset. So let's say, for example, you choose this option, you choose a uh, joint survivor option with you and your spouse, and 2 years into retirement, you guys have a bad car accident and the two of you pass away. There will be nothing left for your kids or whoever you name as a beneficiary because you picked a two life option and you had given the money to MetLife. It is the rest of it is their money at that point. So that's why this is not a great option. If you like the idea of a guaranteed monthly payment, there are plenty of options in the IRA world that don't require you having to give up control of your asset. So definitely talk to a financial planner if this is something you're considering or you need it to bridge a gap between your income goal and what your Social Security and your pension are going to give you. We kind of talked about the withdrawals here. So if you're married and you choose a distribution from TSP, um, it usually is going to require a spousal signature. And that is to just prevent someone from that's maybe going through a divorce from taking all their money out of TSP to hide the money from the divorce. So it does require a spousal consent to do that distribution. Tax rates. You'll see here that if you're over 59 and a half or separated from service and you move it to an IRA, you're bypassing that tax withholding. There's no that's considered like a direct transfer, direct rollover. If you're taking it into your checking savings account, you are going to pay the taxes and potentially a penalty. Um, there are some exceptions to the rule on that. Again, we talked about hardships earlier. Uh, Quadros or basically divorce decrees can force money out of an account without a penalty. But that's because it's a court order and they're still going to a pre-tax account for that former spouse. The TSP Roth option, again, as I mentioned to you, um, you have to have the money in there for at least 5 years, but as long as you are over 59 and a half, um, the money comes out of there tax free. So that is a huge benefit for the Roth contribution sides. Required minimum distributions, or RMDs. This is essentially where the federal government, first of all, this only applies to the pre-tax side or the regular TSP side, but this is where the federal government's saying, "Hey, you've had long enough to grow this pot of money. It's our turn to receive some." And so, depending on the year you were born, it depends on what's called your RMD age. And so this is a change. This changed twice during COVID, pushing the age out further. So it does allow you to defer this a little bit longer, depending on when you were born. But if you're born before July 1st of 1949, the age is 70 and a half that you have to start taking them. If you're between that July of 49 to December 31st of 1950, the age is 72. 1951 to the end of 1959, the age is 73. And anyone born from 1960 or after, the age is 75. And essentially, what that means is we'll use 75, for example. If that's your date, you get to 75, you have to take out a portion of your balance of your previous December 31st year's balance of your account. It's roughly 5%. It does vary a little bit depending on what your age bracket is there, but it's in that 4 to 5% range and pay taxes on that money. Obviously, that's why they're wanting you to do it, right? If you forget to do your RMD, which is going to be very difficult to do, you will receive a lot of notices about it. But if you do, there is a 50% penalty tax applied to that distribution when you take it, and they're going to make you take it. You're just going to lose 50% in a penalty uh, off of that money. So that's pretty steep. Now, there is a revision that can reduce that down now to as much as or to as low as 25% penalty, but keep in mind it's still taxed as well. So you're paying a penalty and a tax on that money that you elected to not take. So either way, not good. Don't do it. Take your RMD. And this is showing the percentage amounts. Again, it's based on um, basically how many years they figure you have left to live based on actuarial tables. So, for example, if you're age 89, your distribution amount is 12% of the previous year's year ending balance in the account. So, when the participant dies, that money then has to be paid out from TSP to a beneficiary. Depending on who that beneficiary is, depends on what the rules are. So, if Your TSP beneficiary is your spouse. Your spouse basically can continue to take out that RMD amount for the rest of their life. Um, or if they're not quite at that age yet, if you weren't that age yet, they can take it out as needed until they hit their RMD age. If it is a child that that is the beneficiary, then they have to take the money out in full at that point in time. And it's not a roll to an IRA situation. They are going to have to pay the taxes on it. If your spouse inherits your TSP and then passes away, and your kids then inherit it after your spouse, same thing applies. They don't have the option to spread it over like you would an IRA over a 10-year period. They have to pay the taxes on the remaining balance in full. So, one major estate planning differential to keep in mind because IRAs do work differently from that standpoint. This is the TSP annuity. I touched on this one earlier, so I'm skip that slide. Couple of things about TSP, just in closing here. Don't misunderstand me. You do not have to close out your TSP account when you leave the government. You can leave the money there if you would like. Um, it's part of your overall retirement strategy. Really dictates kind of what you should do. So you definitely want to seek advice on a one-to-one basis and have somebody look at your entire plan to figure out, the best strategy to have in place here to make sure that you minimize taxes and get the most out of your retirement. Um, so this is, we're going to touch on your estate plan and retirement income plan. This is basically what you're talking about here is all the stuff we just talked about, your benefits from your federal side, but also looking at the big picture, your entire retirement. So it incorporates other accounts, spouses' information, spouses' accounts, spouses' social security, how that all comes together, uh, how the taxes are going to work in retirement on that, and then what type of legacy you want to leave to kids, charities, things like that after the fact. Um, this is a where that one-to-one session comes into play that we talked about, or you meeting with the financial planner of your own, right? I encourage you to do one of those two because failing to plan is not a plan, right? It's going to potentially create issues for you. There are a lot of kind of gotchas into retirement from known taxes to hidden taxes to different rules on different retirement accounts. And then if you're fortunate and have amassed a pretty good life savings, if you will, total net worth, depending on what year you pass, depends on how much the taxes may be on your estate. So all things that you want to take into consideration as part of your overall retirement plan. I definitely encourage, again, meeting with an advisor on this. When you do, I mentioned earlier about checking up on beneficiaries, but beneficiaries should be a point of conversation. I'm also a big fan of making sure that everyone has a financial power of attorney in place in case something happens to you and somebody needs to be able to act on your behalf. I also recommend getting medical directives or medical power of attorneys put in place. Same thing. If you're not able to make medical decisions on your own, you need to have a document in place that allows your kids or spouse to uh, instruct a doctor on how to proceed. So those are things that you definitely want to talk with either an estate planning attorney or your financial planner about to make sure you get those in place for you. This is basically kind of reiterating what I just said, but if you have a financial planner currently, share the information you learned today with them. Have them make sure they build out a good plan and strategy for you to take into account the different things we talked about: survivorship, maximizing your benefits, minimizing taxes, and maximizing your estate. Um, all of these things will vary depending on elections, um, Congress, federal rules. So it's not like a thing where you're going to set it up one time and then forget about it. It's something that you're going to have to revisit this usually every year or every time there's a major event in your family. So keep that in mind. If you don't have a financial planner, again, we are offering the ability for you to get a one-on-one consultation with one of our federal benefits specialists, so they can build out that plan for you. And again, no cost or obligation to that. You just have to indicate that that's something you want to do. This slide here is talking about consumption. Consumption is a essentially the word for how you're going to use your money in retirement. And so what this is talking about here is there is a safe, what they call distribution rate from your investment assets, and then there is a threshold when you go above that that starts to become not safe. And what we mean by not safe is you run into the potential of depleting all of that money while you're still alive. And so the last thing you want to have happen is get into your 80s or maybe even 90s, you run out of this money, Social Security and your pension maybe aren't enough to sustain your retirement, and now you're having to look at going to Walmart or something like that to pick up a side job to make ends meet. Our goal with all of the education we do is to make sure that you get the retirement that you deserve. You put in a long career, hard work, savings, and everything like that. So you deserve to have a plan that rewards you for doing that. Uh, and so I encourage you to meet with someone to make sure that you have a plan kind of built out for you. Um, Timing is one of the things that you should kind of uh, get as part of your plan. So a good plan is going to help you decide when to take Social Security benefits. Um, we talked about some of the pros and cons earlier to that. It talks about alternative investments of timing, when to cut things on, how to minimize the taxes and that. So hopefully that again gives you a good sense of how all these things kind of work. Um, I'm sure you probably have some questions. So again, we are offering the one-on-one consultations. You'll get a benefits report from that, and really get a sense of how everything's going to come together for you in retirement. You have peace of mind that when you go into retirement, again, you get to live on the beach or the boat dock, or the mountains, whatever that dream is that you've got. Um, Even if it's just taking kids and grandkids to Disney World, right? Whatever that is, we want to make sure that you get to do those things. You're not worried about Wall Street and how it's going to affect your ability to do those things in retirement. So um, thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to leave this slide up for just another second or two. Feel free to write down any of the information that you see, but again, there should be an option for you to elect this as well, uh, along with the in the video here is for you. So again, thank you for your time, thank you for your service, and I hope you have a wonderful day.